This is Talk to Seattle, and I'm your host, Jason Rigden. On this episode of the show, I'm here with Taylor Billings of Corporate Accountability. How are you today?
Good, doing well. Thank you so much for having me, Jason.
Oh, yes, of course. Thank you so much for coming on. So, could you tell me a little bit about the mission of corporate accountability and maybe what are some of the problems you're trying to help solve?
Absolutely. So, corporate accountability is a 40 plus year old organization, and we lead a global movement to stop transnational corporations from devastating democracy, trampling human rights, and destroying our planet.
Okay, so a pretty big fight. Like these people are kind of becoming, well, these organizations are kind of becoming almost state level actors.
Yeah. I mean, corporate power is a huge issue when it comes to our democracy and our livelihoods really around the globe. So it's our job to ensure that we rein in that corporate power using people power and building movements and supporting movements around the world.
So there's a lot of things these transnational corporations do that are bad. Or do you have any particular focuses?
Yeah, absolutely. So we actually got our start, as I mentioned, about 40 years ago. And over the last few decades, we've forced some of the most powerful corporations to stop abusive practices. And that includes things like with Nestle, actually made sweeping changes to infant formula promotion that was killing infants across the global south. And General Electric got out of the nuclear weapons business. So today we run four major campaigns, which includes climate, food, water, and our longest running campaign, tobacco. So, yeah, in each of those, Jason, we target the industry leader, again, bringing about that transformational change that will really change the way the world works and allowing a place in which people and the planet are put first instead of profits.
Wow, 40 years is a very long time to be fighting this fight. I mean, things were so different back then.
Yeah, they certainly were. And I think something that's so unique about the work we do that is so vital to our success is that we we start campaigns with the intention of running them as long as necessary to secure the victories necessary. And if that's 40 years, longer or shorter, we're here to challenge corporate power.
And so, could you tell me a little bit more about some of those victories that we've had in the past? I feel like we need to hear more about the victories we've had.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think one of my favorites most recently is on our food campaign. So on our food campaign, we challenge McDonald's for its predatory marketing to children, and McDonald's often cites stores in children's hospitals in an effect to associate the brand with healthfulness. This is very similar to what the tobacco industry used to do by promoting cigarettes with doctors and nurses in hospitals. So we launched our campaign around 2013 to kick out McDonald's from children's hospitals around the country. And to date, more than half of hospitals have broken ties with McDonald's. And we just got news a couple weeks ago at this point that one hospital in Houston became the latest to kick out its McDonald's, which is a huge victory for public health and really exposes some of the deception and misleading marketing that these corporations are attempting to do.
Oh, wow, very cool. Yeah, it's kind of strange how McDonald's has done so many things the tobacco companies did. It's almost like they use the same playbook. I think they even employed some of the same people.
Yeah, it's actually, as I mentioned, our tobacco campaign is our longest running campaign. And so many other abusive industries have, plucked tactics out of Big Tobacco's playbook and employed them. And we see that big soda, big food, definitely with the fossil fuel industry as well.
And does your organization do anything about campaign finance? Because that's also sometimes how it's so hard to rein into these corporations. They have so much money they can just funnel into the campaigns.
Yeah, so we employ really, we like to say we have a toolbox of tactics that help shift the cost benefit ratio for transnational corporations. Because, at the end of the day, one thing is driving a corporation, and that's going to be profit. So if we can make these abusive practices more expensive to run than they are added benefit, the corporation will stop employing that tactic. But when it comes to, as you mentioned, campaign finance, we are a C3, so we don't lobby extensively elected officials, but what we do is hold public officials accountable and making sure that those public officials who are in the pockets of corporations, like many are, unfortunately, really feel the full weight of the public outrage behind that. And we also support those who act in the people's interest and hold global corporations accountable. And that's actually, I mean, I will say we're just off the heels of the midterm elections, although it may seem like very long ago. But while we had wins and losses across the states, corporate accountability showed up in force on ballot measures in state after state. People showed up and overwhelmingly voted to restore voting rights, to reform campaign finance, and kick out corporate power from our democracy, which is a huge win in many ways.
It kind of felt for a while that our battle against tobacco that we were kind of winning, but now with all this vaping stuff, it seems like we might be losing ground. Do you think we are losing ground, or?
I think that you bring up an excellent point with the tobacco industry. For decades, big tobacco has lied to the public and sowed doubt. We often call them the merchants of doubt. They produce junk science, mislead the public, and try to insert themselves into public health policy making. And what we are seeing certainly is an attempt at reinventing itself once again, just like we saw with low nicotine cigarettes or menthol cigarettes or filtered cigarettes. E-cigs are in many ways just a new product being used by the industry as an attempt to regain access to the spaces it's lost. And yeah, I think over the last decades, we've had huge wins on tobacco. In many ways, big tobacco has become a pariah in most policymaking spaces, especially in the halls of government. But of course, we must remain vigilant and recognize big tobacco for what it is, a multi-billion-dollar industry that sells products that, when used as directed, kill people.
Yeah, it doesn't get more concrete than that.
No, it really doesn't. Yeah.
So one thing, when you're talking about those areas of focus for your organization that really jumps out at me is they're almost all tied together with their use of junk science.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a common industry tactic that we've seen, and it's all about sowing doubt in the public perception and public mind. We see this a lot with the fossil fuel industry, that has spent millions sowing doubt by funding climate change denial groups and just confusing people about the true impact of its products.
So your organization's been around for 40 years plus. What have been some of the biggest challenges the organization itself has faced?
I think in many ways, corporate power can feel faceless and nameless, and in some ways feel insurmountable. But one thing that we've done time and again is work alongside movements and support people at the forefront of corporate abuse, often in low-income communities of color, and especially in the global South. And at the end of the day, regardless of the amount of challenges we've faced, and in the really facing immense corporate power, we've shown time and again that people power can win, and that we can cast out corporate influence to achieve a better world.
So with the organization being around for so long, do you think that there's any tips that other organizations that are just starting out could learn?
I think something that really drives us, and something that drew me personally to corporate accountability, is our dedication to our mission. And everyone at this organization, and our supporters and our philanthropic partners and our members that make this work possible, show up every day to lend their time, their money, their interests and support to stop transnational corporations from committing these human rights and environmental abuses. And so having a mission that you really can speak to day in and day out and believe in can really carry you through the decades in a way that's truly powerful, and again, creates transformational change that we need.
Yeah, it's hard to create these sustainable movements. Oftentimes they're tied to one incident, and then once that incident's over, the momentum is kind of lost, and it's very sad.
Yeah, and I think that that's something that is truly tragic when it happens. But when you have something, like a guiding document, or a North Star that you can follow, it really helps you guide yourself and a movement truly through whatever may come up.
And is your organization mostly based here in the US, or are you global?
So something that's pretty tricky about corporations is that they do transcend any type of geographical or political border. So we do work internationally. And I think, unfortunately, with corporations, often in the US, when we may stamp out some abusive practice, often the corporation just exports it to a different country, often, again, in the global South. So it's vital for us to have that global scope and work closely with, through enduring partnerships with those in the global South, leading the movements to hold these corporations accountable.
So, what are some of your plans going forward in the future for this organization?
Something that I have my eyes on right now is COP24, which are the next round of United Nations climate talks that are starting up in just a few weeks, December 3rd in Poland. So right now, unfortunately, Jason, our climate negotiations are pretty heavily co-opted by the fossil fuel industry. So similar to how big tobacco attempted to insert itself into policymaking with public health, the oil and gas industry and big polluters are attempting to write the policy for climate change action. So we organize extensively at the United Nations to ensure that the fossil fuel industry's manipulative tactics are exposed, and that we really have a people first Paris Agreement that can chart a path forward for a world in which we don't exceed, ideally, 1.5 degrees of warming. And as we're gearing up for that conference, it's actually a pretty exciting moment, because for the first time, global coalitions of climate justice and frontline communities have compiled a collective set of demands of the UN climate talks process. And all of these demands actually tie in to what's on the agenda for the talks, which means that governments can use them to make sure that what comes out of these talks is as strong as possible for people, which is really exciting and something that is going to, I think, be a game changer in terms of what governments are calling for and how the fossil fuel industry's interference is going to be exposed at the talks.
So, how can people get involved to help with those?
So first, you can share them and sign them. They're called the People's Demands, and we have a great website. All the conveners. Let me redo that. There is the People's Demands are available on peoplesdemands.org, and you can share them and sign them. And we will be having a few actions in the lead up to the talks in the next few weeks, as well as at the talks in Poland. So be sure to keep an eye on the website there to make sure you're in touch with what's happening.
And are there any other upcoming projects happening?
Yes. So on our water campaign, and our water campaign challenges the commodification of water. We believe that water is a human right and it shouldn't be bought or sold. So we challenge water privatizers like Veolia and Suez, as well as water bottlers like Coke, Pepsi, and Nestle. So in January, we are organizing alongside one of our allies, Environmental Rights Action Friends of the Earth Nigeria, which is an organization that's leading a movement in Lagos, Nigeria, to have a fully public water system. Because what happens, unfortunately, Jason, when a private corporation gets involved with the water system is that it's run for profit rather than access. And there's some pretty horrible outcomes that can come from that, including rate hikes, labor abuses, and even public health crises. So in January, Environmental Rights Action, with organizations from around the globe, are convening a summit in Abuja, Nigeria, the capital of Nigeria, to, again, chart a way forward for public water and to expose the abuses of the private water industry. So that's something we're really excited about as well, considering it's been a long time coming to kind of connect the dots between different water privatization failures, unfortunately, around the globe, and compile a list of solutions and strategies to move forward.
Yeah, some of those stories of the water privatization are pretty horrifying. I mean, we take it for granted. I'm here in Seattle, so we have a water system that works, but other places they don't, and then they try to privatize it, and it just becomes a disaster.
Yeah, it's really not suitable for achieving the human right to water. And I mean, so you're in Seattle. Were you following the ballot initiative on the affordable groceries.
Was that the soda tax?
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah, I mean, I bring that up. I mean, have you spoken to folks about that after it?
Personally, but not on the show.
Yeah. Well, I mean, so there was this ballot initiative in Washington and Oregon that was branded as vote yes on affordable groceries, but in reality, it was a ballot initiative funded almost exclusively by big soda, Coca-Cola, Pepsi. And what it ended up being was a prevention, right, on soda taxes and not allowing them to be enacted. So we talked a little bit earlier about big soda and big food taking tactics from big tobacco, and this is a perfect example, and one that probably hits home for a lot of folks in Washington. Is this was a mega corporation funding an initiative and misleading the public as to what exactly it was. And soda taxes are something that we know is effective in terms of reducing soda consumption and hurting corporations' bottom line, the profit. So as we look forward into the next few months, we'll be monitoring ballot initiatives and exposing the corporate interference that happens to mislead the public.
Yeah, it's kind of a pattern I've seen for years where cities will enact laws that certain corporations don't like, and then they will attempt to preempt those laws at the state level. We've even seen this with the internet. So a lot of cities have wanted to make their own internet service have been stopped because of state laws that companies like Comcast have put in place.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's unfortunately, it happens a lot. But the good news is that we know what it is and we know it's a tactic. And so once people are aware of it, it's a lot easier to organize around and really move the public climate to a place where that's untenable.
Well, corporate accountability is very important. Your organization sounds fantastic. Is there anything that I should have asked you that maybe I missed?
I think, at the end of the day, corporate power and corporations will outlast any term in office. So challenging corporate power and recognizing the corporate players that may be behind 90% of the world's problems can be a really effective theory of change that can move us to achieve a world in which, as I mentioned, people and the planet are put first over profits. And yeah, it's vital. It's really important work. Yeah. I'm trying to think if there's anything else that I like to talk about. Oh, I mean, there's one good example of, so we have two grand strategies, and one of them is organizing people around the world to apply direct and strategic pressure on corporations. And the second is locking in those changes by strengthening democratic institutions like the United Nations and the World Health Organization. But one really good example of how we've used media to shift the public climate is, I like to talk about the fossil fuel industry, because a couple of years ago, the fossil fuel industry's go-to messaging was to entirely denounce climate change. Doesn't exist. Then a little while later, oh, okay, it exists, but we had nothing to do with it. And now you see fossil fuel corporations not only accepting that climate change is a reality, but attempting to present itself as a solution to climate change. And that shift is something that is due almost entirely to the people power and organizing that's happened around the world to hold the fossil fuel industry's feet to the fire and acknowledge that not only is the fossil fuel corporations driven climate change, but they've profited off of it and attempt to denounce its true impacts.
Yeah, it's very amusing too, because as that shift has occurred, the fringe has also moved, because now you have people, it's not entirely uncommon to hear people frame climate change as not that big of a deal. It's going to be actually good for agriculture, which is insane.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that shift is a really good marker of success, but also still not where we need it to be, of course. So at the UN climate negotiations in December, we'll be monitoring and exposing the fossil fuel industry's influence. And we'll be also monitoring the US's involvement, because there may be an impression that since Trump said he would withdraw from the Paris Agreement, that it's had no role in the talks. But unfortunately, that's far from the case. So in fact, we've seen the US a little bit try to kind of light the place on fire on its way out of the front door. The US has really derailed conversations on how we're going to pay for dealing with climate change, which is central to everything, especially to countries in the global south who have done the least to cause climate change but are suffering from the worst impacts. So the US is really only allowing progress on issues that they support, like false solutions, including market mechanisms, which have been found to largely only perpetuate the climate crisis. So we're going to be there again this year, challenging the US's obstructionism and exposing it for what it is and letting people know here in the US what's really happening. Because the US government is certainly not respecting or reflecting the will of the US people at those negotiations.
So, how can people get involved with corporate accountability?
So we are a people-powered organization. So we welcome everyone and anyone to get involved in our campaigns. I recommend you donate either your time or your money if you're able. All four of our campaigns are vital to achieving the transformational change we need. So check out our website. It's corporateaccountability.org and get involved. We'd love to have you.
Well, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Of course, Jason, thank you so much for having me.